Hey, welcome back to Global Environment. We're talking about the limits to growth model. Last segment we talked about how it was constructed, the interactions that were involved, and now we're going to see what the predictions were from the model. Okay, so let's go and look at the basic run. So it's kind of business as usual. So if you look at that basic run, you can see a timeline down here, 1900 and then 2100. So they ran it down in here in 1972. We're in here someplace. Now, what does the basic world standard run say? It says that resources will decline over this century. Food per capita will go up. It'll kind of reach a maximum, then decline. Industrial output per capita will go up and then start to decline. Pollution will continue to rise, and then it will get to a point where even that declines. And then population rises, and then sometime in this century, overshoot and collapse in population. And you can see some other lines here. It's birth rates and death rates. But the basic model says that sometime later in this century, we'll see something very similar to the limits, not the limits to growth, but the Easter Island microcosm with overshoot and collapse. So not the most optimistic outcome. So they didn't just stop here. What they tried to do next is see, could they make a sustainable society? What did they have to do to kind of keep population going and make sure everyone had enough food and enough wealth per person? So they tried different scenarios. So let's look at some of these. Okay, they said, well, what if we're wrong and we're able to double our resource base? Okay? We're able to double our resource base, and because of recycling, we're able to extend that resource base even further. So, basically they're saying, can we extend the resource base, about fourfold or so? Would that solve the problems? All right, so they ran the model, and what you'll see is they found that, okay, if the resource base was able to continue, we still had a problem with pollution getting to us. So let's look at that run. So again, because of recycling and a new assessment of pollution, resources doesn't decline that much. By the end of this century, we're still okay. But because basically industrial output is able to go up even further, pollution rises even more. And because pollution gets so high that it starts impacting food per capita and also basically basic mortality, population still goes into steep decline in this century. So pollution is what gets us in this scenario. So this didn't work at all. So they said, what else can we do? So they went back and said, okay, what if we find ways to control pollution so that basically our pollution controls are 4 times more powerful than what we see today? Maybe that will do it. So basically they ran that, and they still had difficulties because food per capita started to decline because land was being utilized so much. And industry started to collapse as well. So we can see that in this printout. So resources didn't go down as much. Again, we have recycling and close to unlimited resources, and pollution is kept steady. But you can see industrial output continues to go up, and basically food per capita, because of land use, goes into decline. And we get out a little farther with population, but still near the end of this century, population starts to decline. We're not able to get enough food for the population. Okay, so this didn't really work. Maybe it was moderately better, but it's still not a sustainable society. So they tried to come up with more scenarios. And they said, wait a minute, maybe population is the problem. So what if we had perfect birth control, no unwanted children, and we found a way to double agriculture? We had another basically green revolution. There still were problems with erosion and problems with the resource base. Also problems with pollution. So controlling population basically didn't look like enough. So we can see how that played out. So resources decline, food per capita, it goes way up, and then it ends up going way down because of erosion. Industrial output goes up, it still declines, and we have problems with pollution, though we get some funny jumps in it. But you look, we were able to stabilize population for a while, but again, right toward the end of the century, again, a decline. So maybe a little bit better, but still some serious problems, still not sustainable in the long run. Okay, so they're running out of options here. Even population with perfect birth control wasn't enough. So they came up with some other scenarios. What if we stabilize the population? And in this case, they just said, what if we made birth rates equal to death rates? Okay, stabilized population. You can think of a nice scenario where birth rates would be low and death rates would be also be low, but this also covers high death rate, high birth rate, which most people wouldn't enjoy. In this scenario, there still was a problem with economic collapse, and you can see it in the output here. So resources decline a lot, pollution goes up for a while, food per capita is, and industrial output per capita is really great until sometime in this century, and a collapse in industry. But you do have a stabilized population. But what you might notice is death rates and birth rates go up. So we have a society here with a stable population. So you might say, in some sense, that's you know, that's sustainability. But people are very poor and they don't eat a lot, and basically most people wouldn't be happy with this situation. So maybe this isn't the outcome we want. So they tried to come up with a scenario that works. And they, believe it or not, they came up with one that did. But it was very controversial, because what they had to do is stop population growth. So no population growth. Okay, that might seem logical, but you could understand why that might be a little bit controversial. The other thing that was really controversial, basically, is that they had to stop all growth in the economy. So a cap on capital investment. So no economic growth. Again, that's very controversial. The dominant paradigm says growth is good. This said growth is bad. They also had to put in recycling and pollution controls. And we can see the output of this scenario. And again, you can see that most of the lines in this are very stable. And food per capita is stable, industrial output per capita is stable, pollution is low, population sustainable, and resources gets us into the next century. So this is the only way they could do it, the only way they could make it work. And again, growth, no growth in the economy is a solution. Most people would think that's, you know, that's against everything we've learned. So you can imagine that this wasn't well received, especially by economists. Okay, so they ran another scenario too. They said, well, what if we waited to set these population policies and economic growth policies until the year 2000? What would happen? So if we waited to start these scenarios. And what they found is that society wasn't sustainable. Population started to decrease, food per capita, industrial output per capita started to increase. So they said that there was a time limit. We had to do something, and it had to be done soon. So they have updated this study 2 times. Once more, they did it 20 years later in 1992, and they did it a few years ago in 2002. And it's kind of amazing because they get very similar results. So again, this is your basic business as usual scenario. Now they're working with better data, better computers. They get the same outcome. Resources go down, industrial output goes up for a while, food per capita goes up, population goes up, and again, sometime in this century, overshoot and collapse. And they tried to solve it again, and their basic solution was the same. no population growth rate, and also no economic growth. Again, it was the only way to make it work, and in the new scenarios they found that they could start these policies now and still save the environment, so slightly different. But again, the overall solutions, the overall outcomes for business as usual, basically the same. They also put in this picture in the study, which I really find fascinating. And what you see here is your basic model, business as usual, and then here you have the timeline of certain things in our society. For example, the influence of CFCs on the ozone layer, the lifetime of a child born in 1990, your operating life of an electricity plant, a coal-burning plant built in 1990. Now look at these two. This is the office for the term of office for an elected official, and this is the payback period for a corporate investment. Now, what do these things all have to do with one another? Well, for the environment, we have to think long term, because cause and effect can be over the course of 100 years, 1,000 years. But generally, we're making decisions that affect these things that are based on 4, 5, 6 years of looking forward. So that's driving our decision making, but really the things that are being impacted go for a lifetime or more. So are we making decisions using the right metrics? That is basically what this says. All right, so we're going to stop there, and in the next segment we're going to talk about some of the key ideas drawn from limits to growth. How can we make sure we get a sustainable society, and how can science be a tool for that? So I'll see you next time on Global Environment.